Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Yeah, living with the people of the Anglo-Indian community in an Anglo-Indian residential area for 2 years, interacting with them and getting to understand them better, it made me wonder and ponder as to why did I have only just some stereotypical images of the people of the community in my mind before meeting them in real. So when I thought I got the answer, I was heavily influenced by the kind of films that I saw. Yes, Malayalam cinema produced in the state of Kerala did only present me with certain imagined and caricatured representations of Anglo-Indians in films. So getting into my paper, Malayalam cinema with an illustrious legacy of 80 years has seldom tried to sketch the ambivalence of Anglo-Indian representation. This is an account of the serious cultural colonization of the mindscape of the Malayali audience by the elitist dogmata of the upper middle class and upper caste in Kerala, leading to the selective alienation or absence of the stories of the socially marginalized people like the Anglo-Indians. Being films scripted and directed by people who are obviously not part of the community, these films can only present the audience with an outsider's perspective, an outsider who is obviously not all-knowing or omniscient. This alien gaze has resulted in the fabrication of a host of stereotypes in the representation of the minority community of Anglo-Indians who are visualized as inferior and as the other. So, with the focus on the dynamics of Malayalam cinema and its discourses of filming identities in the last 5 decades, that is from 1970s to 2018, my paper explores the doctrinal work performed by Malayalam cinema in employing Anglo-Indians as a tool to merely sensationalize and glamorize the didactic world of cinema. Also, this paper explores the misrepresentation of this minority community of Anglo-Indians by the majority communities in Kerala. And this is to be done so as to foreground the need for the inclusion of the marginalized Anglo-Indian episteme in the mainstream Malayalam cinemascape. So since the conference is all about researching on Anglo-Indians, let me share my experience of research. To be precise, my experience of research as an outsider to the community, it has indeed been challenging, and as a privileged member of a majority community, the questions before me were innumerable. Overcoming long-held prejudices against the community was the first step undertaken, and then my attention shifted to answering certain pivotal questions, like, why is it that cinema always looks at, address, and demonize Anglo-Indians as the other or as strangers? Why does Malayalam cinema, an artistic expression with a legacy of 80 years, present its audience only with certain stereotyped images of a significant community like the Anglo-Indians? Is it because they are literally of this kind, or are there other reasons? With this in mind, the primary objective of the research was to locate the films produced in Malayalam either completely on Anglo-Indian life or with minor Anglo-Indian representations. The trajectory of films thus traced was analyzed, and which revealed the presence of certain patterns in the characterization of the Anglo-Indian community. A review of literature proved that there has not been serious research done in this area, and that is reflected in the lack of secondary material available. So the interviews with the members of the Anglo-Indian community from all age groups was then embarked on, which evidently pointed to their grave displeasure and disapproval of the modes and methods in which their community is caricatured in Malayalam cinema. So the first notable Malayalam film that tried to express Anglo-Indian life on screen was K.S. Sethumadhavan's film Chattakari, or The Anglo-Indian Girl, which came out in the year 1974. Chattakari could fittingly be visualized as a film or as a conceit conjured up by a writer from a powerful Hindu caste community that constructs the Anglo-Indian family using derogatory stereotypes in terms of their customs, food habits, and stature, which irrevocably asserts the ascendancy of the modernized, reformist Hindu family in the film. Attributable to the triumph of Chattakari, which won several state film accolades in the year 1975, later movies like Devathinte Vikirthigal, which came up in the year 1992, Agale, which came up in 2004, a remake version of Chattakari, which came up in 2012, and the latest film, Hey Jude. All these films followed suit and came up with Anglo-Indian narratives, which, however, were highly flawed. So this study predominantly focuses on all these films with Anglo-Indian representations, which are set in entirely Anglo-Indian backdrops, and it also analyzes other films with marginal Anglo-Indian expressions like Madanolsavam, Boing Boing, Vandanam, Love in Singapore, Currency, Violin, ABCD, Annayam Rasoolum, Eeyobinte Pusthagam, Premam, and Mariyamukku. An exploration of all these films divulge the increasingly sectarian and casteist ideal of Malayalam cinema. The upper middle class and caste hegemony in the Kerala society astutely conferring the Anglo-Indian ethnicity, the status of the other, is what an examination of all these films reveal. It inexorably creates typified caricatures of Anglo-Indian femininities, Anglo-Indian masculinities, and there happens a deliberate denigration of the culture, beliefs, customs, and traditions of the Anglo-Indian community. So my paper is basically divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I will be dealing with the stereotyping of Anglo-Indian women in Malayalam cinema. The second part deals with the stereotyping of Anglo-Indian men. And the third part deals with the deliberate denigration of the liminal lives of Anglo-Indians in terms of their culture. So coming to the first part, stereotyping of Anglo-Indian women in Malayalam cinema. Women of the Anglo-Indian community, though a hybrid populace of the European and the Indian ancestry, are considered more close at hand with their European counterparts, or this is how the patriarchal predilections of Malayalam cinema perceives them to be. The upshots of such bogus slants is nothing but the libidinous and demonic impressions of the women of this hybrid population in films as skimpily dressed playgirls and erotic ciphers who woo the men of the upper caste with their exceedingly voluptuous ways and deeds. Filmic discourses seem to be targeting Anglo-Indian women because of the supposed enticement of the European men, which is conceived as an act of moral degradation by the orthodox Malayali community. Along these lines, Malayalam cinema has also been nefariously unfair and blemished in its formulaic representation of the Anglo-Indian women characters as shallow, ill-informed, worthless, proud, cold, apathetic, malevolent, careless, and so on. As for instance, the veteran Malayalam actress Sukumari has been employed by Malayalam cinema to embody copious Anglo-Indian female characters on screen, as for instance, the bedeviling mother and the irksome wife, Mrs. Margaret in Chattakari, the ill-humoured and sullen maid, Mrs. Dick in Boing Boing, the bar owner Mama in Orkapurathu, and the haughty landlord Maggie Andy in Vandanam. When we look at it, what we get to understand is that all these characters are just stereotypical images of the Anglo-Indian women, and what they do is that they create an imagined femininity which evokes laughter, either laughter or scorn in the audience. So an ideal example of how Malayalam cinematic apparatus typifies Anglo-Indian women is Chattakari, which unwittingly becomes part of the bandwagon of films hell-bent on othering the Anglo-Indian women. A close probing into it divulges that the film ideologically reassures all the denigrating Anglo-Indian stereotypes, especially those about the women of the community. The title of the film, Chattakari, is a pun on the Anglo-Indian girl, as the Malayalam term Chattakari in one sense alludes to a lady who wears a chatta, that is a V-necked top that is worn along with a checkered dhoti, which is against the traditional garb of the women of Kerala, which is sari. So this term Chattakari is used in a pejorative sense to allude to the Anglo-Indian women whose dressing style is different from the women of Kerala. The costumes sported by Anglo-Indian women in films are typified, as for example, in Chattakari, the heroine Julie and her sister Eilin's short and glamorous costumes are contrasted with the traditional attires of the Hindu girl Usha in the film. Also, in most of the films centered on Anglo-Indian life, it is a set notion that the characterization of Anglo-Indian women should be as promiscuous femme fatales and sexual sirens. that she is vulnerable, is available to everyone, is easily approachable for sexual favors, and her identity is marked by her relationship with several men are all the stereotypes that Malayalam cinema employs. Through which what happens is that a vulgarization of the Anglo-Indian women, which epitomizes the Hindu women or the upper caste women as women of utmost purity. This stereotypical Anglo-Indian female promiscuity trope could be found in later films like Devathinte Vikrithigal, Madanolsavam, etc. So coming to the next part, fetishization of the Anglo-Indian female body becomes manifest. As for instance, in Chattakari, several men make sexual advances toward Julie and she is gazed at by Mr. Pillai, an Indian big shot with dishonorable intentions, whom her mother invites home for a party. In a reverse shot from Pillai's point of view, the camera first voyeuristically focuses on Julie's legs and then slowly moves upward until it rests on her face, which reiterates and subtly normalizes the objectification and commodification of the Anglo-Indian woman's body. So what happens essentially in Malayalam films is that the Anglo-Indian women are either fetishized or they are considered as abject. We know Julia Kristeva's theoretical conception of the abject that is employed to describe bodies and things that one finds repulsive or disgusting, and in order to preserve one's identity, the abject is generally cast out. So as for instance, Eobinte Pusthakam, the film in 2004, has a first-generation Anglo-Indian woman born out of the illegitimate relationship between the British landlord Harrison and the ethnic tribal native woman Kadali. Martha is systematically ostracized by the society along with her mother, and both are abjected as witches with uncanny powers and so are outcasted. I do have several other examples of Anglo-Indian female stereotyping, but since there are time constraints, I'm getting into the second part, which is about Anglo-Indian male stereotyping in Malayalam cinema. Malayalam cinema, since its inception, has been the domain of unparalleled hegemonic masculinity, which revels in creating and celebrating picture-perfect avatars of male machismo, which are essentially those of the upper caste Hindus or Syrian Christians, and not of the men of the marginalized community like the Anglo-Indians. Owing to such parochialisms which are rampant in Malayalam cinema, Anglo-Indian masculinities have markedly and strategically been underemphasized, and dominant caste sovereignty is slyly established in almost all the films by contrasting the Anglo-Indian men against the upper caste Hindu or Syrian Christian characters in the film. Anglo-Indian male characters have been typified in Malayalam filmic discourses as capricious, hoodwinking and sluggish, which culminates in them being represented as the other, procuring the center for the men of the elite caste. So with all these assumed blotches, the Anglo-Indian male is habitually rendered in Malayalam cinema as Machiavellian and not fully adult figures. For instance, the penniless commission agents Freddy and his father Nicholas in the film Orkapurathu, the fraudulent investor Andrews Pereira in Love in Singapore, the counterfeit currency fabricator Daniel D'Souza in Currency, the effeminate dance teacher Dolly DeCruz in Premam, the business-minded trickster figure Lloyd Casper Anderson in Mariamukku, and the scheming miser Dominic Rodriguez in Hey Jude, all bound by the commonality of being hybrid Anglo-Indians, are caricatured as cliched Anglo-Indian prototypes who are notorious and duplicitous. So evidently, Malayalam cinema relentlessly makes it a point to sketch out the Anglo-Indian men as people with thwarted dreams, and the characters Neil D'Costa and Freddie Evans in the film Agale by Shyama Prasad are examples of such Anglo-Indian male stereotypings. So the next thing is that a substantial share of the stereotyping of the Anglo-Indian men in Malayalam cinema also includes his craving for booze, as it is erroneously alleged that such men drink away the family's money, not bringing home the greater part of their salaries. The drunk and frustrated Anglo-Indian male prototype is nothing but a cliched image of mockery and a fantasy of the upper caste hate culture. Illustrating this point, Neil in the film Agale is the epitome of Anglo-Indian male stereotyping, as he is a reckless drunkard and a chain smoker who whiles away time watching movies in the film house. So Alfonso in the film Devathinte Vikrithigal, reminiscent of this character Neil, is that typical Anglo-Indian male representation of a romantic fellow, a dreamer who smokes, drinks, and does nothing productive but plays on the beach with children. So we have a scene in this film Devathinte Vikrithigal wherein Alfonso lays his hand open before his wife and asks to her for money, but she doesn't give him money. So the film also has a scene wherein Maggie persistently taunts him for his enervated masculinity, and she even asks him to start working like a man. So here is reflected the stereotypical portrayal of a good-for-nothing Anglo-Indian male and the authoritarian lady of the household. This bluntly points to the fact that Malayalam cinema can only fancy Anglo-Indian men as ineffectual and good-for-nothing drunkards, as there always exists a serious misconception that the Anglo-Indian community consists of henpecked men hamstrung by the dominant women of the household. Okay. I too have several other examples of Anglo-Indian male stereotyping wherein we have a film called Hey Jude wherein a character is portrayed as an abnormal being. Anglo-Indian male is portrayed as an abnormal being without agency, and he is epitomized as the epitomized as an imperfect figure. So what essentially happens in Malayalam cinema is that it always foregrounds the image of upper caste messiah figures who are there to save the Anglo-Indian characters. So what becomes evident through this is that Malayalam cinema methodically exposes the ploy of positive self-presentation, that is positive upper caste presentation, and negative other or minority presentation. Third part of my paper is about the denigration of the Anglo-Indian culture, beliefs and traditions. Since I don't have time, maybe if you can refer to my paper, you would get to know better. I have talked about films wherein there is no mention of the surnames of Anglo-Indian characters, and what this points to is that Malayalam cinema doesn't care whether it is Dikrus or Disus or anything. It is only that it doesn't look into the serious, intricate divisions within the community, but what it just wants the men of the community or the people of the community to be employed as slapstick figures whose duty is either to create scorn or laughter in the audience. Yeah, and it goes on like that. Maybe I would conclude. The Anglo-Indian community has always been a strong and compelling presence in the general spectrum of Kerala society right since colonization. However, popular sensibility of the popular cinema is and has always been with the upper caste and the middle class Keralites. As a result, the voice of the Anglo-Indians is almost inaudible in the elitist Malayali public sphere. Since the perceptions, discernments, and the consequent ways of behavior of the world are exceedingly swayed and shaped by the ideological messages that have encultured through popular mediums such as cinema, I believe it's high time that we start to look beyond stereotypes, bust the myth, and subvert the flawed representations of Anglo-Indians in films in general, Malayalam cinema in particular, thus guaranteeing the integration of the community into the Kerala culture, Kerala society, or maybe into the Indian society at large. Thank you.